Welcome. This is the first of the segments in Paul's second missionary journey. We're going to focus on Acts 35 through 36. This presentation is a part of your Greek exegesis course. We're providing you the historical and geographical context. So let's begin. I'm your host, Susan Hares, your instructor, and this is a 14-part series. We will go several series to Thessalonica, and then we will race ahead of the mob home from Paul's journeys. So let's begin. Just to provide you context again, this is part of your Greek exegesis where the first step is the looking at the text. Second is looking at the inside the text. Do we understand the words, the grammar, the syntax? The third part is looking at intertext. What is the historical setting and the contextual setting of the writings? Well, at this point, let us just jump right into Acts 15:35. If you look at Acts 15:35 through 36, you find that Polos de kai Barnabas diatripon in Anastasia, which is Paul and Barnabas stayed in Antioch. Now they were teaching and preaching the word of the Lord along with others, but what we'd like to know is why did they stay in the Antioch teaching and preaching after the first missionary journey? Well, let's dive into it. Where was the first missionary journey? It was from Antioch through Crete up into the cities on the coast, and then to Antioch, Pistia, Anakanai, Lystra, and Derbe, and then returning. And when they got to the coast, they went back home. Well, Antioch seems to be at the center. Why is Antioch at the center? One thing is Antioch was the largest, first place that the Christians were considered Christians. It is also in a very key place in geography. If you look at Jerusalem, it's at the southern yellow arrow. If you go up to the arrow in the middle, that's Antioch. And Antioch sits at one end of a critical bay. That's called an issus. And at this bay, you find that it is in a very interesting geographical location. From Tarsus, which is pointed to by the blue, there's a critical mountain pass that allows easy transition from the plains of Lacanaya to Tarsus. Then you walk around the Syrian plains where there are several cities, and then there's a critical mountain pass near Antioch. And from Antioch, you can go over a set of hills to the Euphrates. So this particular place on one edge of the Isthmus Sinus means bay, has the gates to both Turkey and to Euphrates. And if you go south through the various river valleys and through Jerusalem and the King's Highway, or through the Seaway, you can get to Egypt. And Egypt was a critical place. So Tarsus is the gateway to Turkey, and Antioch is the gateway to the Euphrates. So why was Antioch also a large city for Christians? It was because it was the third largest city in Rome's empire. Of course, the first was Rome, where all the major families and the emperor lived, the families that were in the Senate, the equestrians, which is a little lower, and then all the people who served them in Rome. The second was Alexandria. Alexandria is marked by 2, and it's on the delta near for the Nile River. The Nile River is a place where the water always flows and provides additional nourishment for the fields, so it became a key growing grain. The third part is Antioch, which is key to the regions of Mesopotamia, the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and to Cappadocia, Galatia, and several other things. Now, all 3 parts of these are a very critical part of the financial piece. It's said that even Nero, who was extravagant, greedy, and cruel, he was most characterized by being a squanderer of money. In Suetonius, it says he believed that meaning Nero, believed that fortunes were being made to be squandered, and whoever could keep track of himself was a stingy miser. When Nero found himself bankrupt, his financial difficulties were such that he could not even lay hands on enough money for his soldiers' pay or the veterans. And see, the major families paid for the armies, so they were interested in conquering new areas to get new taxes so they could pay for their armies and grow further. Well, what about Tarsus on the plains? This area of Tarsus was used by perhaps by the Hittites or earlier peoples where they came across and they captured this key area and then went down toward Egypt. And as Egypt fought back, you see this is where the Jerusalem and Judea and Galilee became battle zones. Well, one of the people that marched across were the Persians as they conquered it. A second is Alexander, and he had a very critical battle in this particular plains of Sicilia plains about 333 BC. There he marched and he fought the Persians, and the Greeks came with their soldiers from the west and down through Tarsus, and the Persians came around the mountains through a pass and fought on the plains. Well, as you know, Alexander went on to conquer the rest of the world, though the rest of what they would consider the modern world in Rome, where it considered Greece, Turkey, parts of Egypt, and then went to conquer toward the Indus Valley, north of Indus in India. But when he died, his generals split the take, and they had Suclidius, who took most of Persia, Antigonus, who took most of Turkey, Cassander, who took some portions of Macedonia, and Lysander, who took most of Thrace. However, these generals also fought with one another, and by the time you get to 240, you had the Suclidian Empire that captured most of the area around Antioch. There's still a little bit of Antigon Empire in Macedonia, and we will come back to that. Egypt was ruled by the general Ptolemy, and that became the that became an empire of his descendants. And so you see, Antioch was one of the cities created by Secludus Nectar. If we look at Strabo, which is one of the historians who finished a history about 23 CE, he writes in Greek that there were 4 large cities called Tripolis, notice the number of 4 and the polis for the cities, as we see that in bold. And he says the largest cities was Antioch Epidane, but if you look at the Greek, that's Antioch he epi delphine. Now, often they'll call people by a name and then where they're from. So Antioch at the Delphine, or upon the Delphine. This was the name of his father, and he named Antioch for his father. Seclusia in Perea was one of the cities which is named after himself, and that's a port city which was considered the strongest economic, which is why Strabo calls it the strongest. And then Apamea, which you'll see I bolded here, and Laodicea, which are named for his wife and his mother. So Antioch was created. Now, what does it look like? Here's a picture of modern Antioch in amongst the mountains with the Oris River moving between it. Well, what would it have looked like then? The best way to take a look at that is to look at the actual picture of the ancient city. One thing you notice in ancient cities is they used rivers and gates to rivers as a way to protect it. You notice there's an imperial palace, there's the Hippodrome, and there's several perhaps baths or atriums, but here the citizens it was the last area of protection. In Cyclidius, he also put a wall upon a great deal of the area, but if you look here upon the city, you'll find that his wall creates a very short piece. But after the Romans conquered it, this was expanded in either the wall of Tiberias, which is much larger into the mountains, because the Rome found this a very important gate for other lands. So if you look at it, there's a road down the middle which is called the Colonnade Road here in English, and it goes in toward the actual palace. But on this would have been the shops or the streets for particular places such as silversmiths, or perhaps there would be tent makers, which would have been Paul's career, or other things along the colonnade. Now, notice in the blue here is where the Jewish community was, and the P for Paul or Peter would have been here, which are a set of caves. Again, the Christians might have met in caves or buried, but we find some early churches there. Now, the way to Alexandria follows the sea, and the way to Cyclidius Peri goes towards the port city. Well, this is a diagram that might have had where you can see the city gates at some of the exits of the roads, and also the city. What does it look like today? Well, here's an overlay on the modern city where you see the J for the Jews and the Peter's Grotto and the river going through, and yet you can sort of see these outlines of roads going through. What does the grotto look like? Well, there is, as you see, some weathered mountains and a church later built up against the sea. So thank you for looking at this first presentation about Acts 36 through 41.